Welcome back. We've talked a lot about the state of the economy right now, where things are headed. Are we headed down the road towards a recession? There's a lot to get to. Plus, the question is, are we prepared for it? Bankrate analyst Sarah Foster is here on Fox 5's The Final Five to talk about this and more. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
There is a term that I've only heard of today, and it's recession fatigue. And I know that we've talked a lot about what a recession could be, what it would mean to us right now, but let's get to the meaning of that term first. What does recession fatigue mean?
Yeah, well, I think recession fatigue is kind of aptly described. So many Americans for the past 2.5 years really have felt like they're living through unprecedented times. It's like the hits keep on coming, first with the pandemic, then, of course, with 40-year high inflation, as we know, and now with risks of a recession. I think where the fatigue comes in really is just the experience of living through the pandemic, lockdowns, which were necessary to curb the spread of the virus. They really deprived us of those activities that we enjoy most. And a lot of times when it comes down to preparing for recessions, it means cutting back on those yet again. And so at a time when Americans feel like they just started to get their lives back, it's kind of like everything's kind of crumbling down again.
You know, for my generation, I mean, we really were coming into our own during the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And then obviously you mentioned the pandemic. And then we hear a lot of mixed signals about where this economy is headed. And granted, gas prices and the stock market, they are not direct indicators of where we're headed. There are other factors that figure into that. But, you know, from what you've seen so far, how real is the threat of a recession as things stand right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of economists would say that the risks of a recession, especially within the last few months, have substantially increased. And even according to a Bankrate survey that we have of the nation's top economists, they put the chances of a downturn between now and the end of 2023 at 52%. So essentially, it's a coin flip. I think when we think about Americans, especially for the recession preparedness, it is a really important time to make sure that you do have your finances in order. Obviously, it's very heartbreaking when we consider the fact that if another downturn were to begin between that time frame, just 44 months would separate us between the end of the coronavirus pandemic-induced recession and then a potential next one. So I think that's really where this fatigue also comes in. Really, that would be the shortest kind of break between expansion, recession that we've seen since the 1980s. So we can't really understate how unusual it is to see just kind of this, what a lot of economists could call a W-shaped kind of economic recovery recession. Starts with a dip and then follows by an expansion, then results in another dip again.
During the early days of the pandemic, there were a lot of calls, not just from individuals, but for businesses, for the government to step in and do something. There were stimulus checks that went out at one point. You know, really not something that people could plan their futures with. That's not really the point of that. But as you mentioned, that idea of coming back out of 2 years of travel restrictions or lockdowns, whatever you want to call them, and people looking to splurge. And there is that urge, you know, whether it's to go on a vacation or to buy a car. A lot of people want to go buy houses right now. Your best advice for people who find themselves in that boat is really to, I would assume, modify the behaviors again.
Yeah, I think, well, looking at recession fatigue, I think is really interesting because it kind of hints at this idea that we don't really want to go back to the scarcity mindset that we were maybe living through during the pandemic. And rightfully so. I think so many Americans went without the things that brought them joy for so long. And so being able to continue to maybe find a way to make a vacation work for you, maybe purchase something that brings you joy, maybe buy a $5 coffee here and now. I think every now and then that's perfectly fine for your personal finances, but it just comes down to making sure that you're wise about those decisions, that you can fit it into your budget. And so I think what that really means is it's important to look at your spending, look at your budgeting, look at where your income is coming in, and make sure that it's all aligning with your personal goals.
Last thing, we talk about the stock market so much, and you know, as I look up at the TVs again today, it has been a rough couple of days. You sort of want to deny yourself that urge to check your 401k because it is a bit discouraging right now for people who are investing. as we potentially prepare for something, what's your advice for that long-term outlook? If you look at your stocks and maybe you have an Apple stock that's dropped significantly in the last couple of weeks, what do you do?
Yeah, well, I think exactly what you said. I think it's really important to look at your time horizon. If you're invested for the long haul, these temporary dips, these volatile markets, that shouldn't be something that really worries you right now, especially when you think about those record highs that we saw in the stock market back in 2021. I mean, for so many Americans, these are heavily discounted that could only continue to hopefully rise again once a lot of these question marks about the economy, a lot of these storm clouds clear from the sky, the horizon. But I think what's really important too is just to make sure that you're diversified, to look at your strategy in that sense. And then once you make sure that you're set for the long haul, don't touch it, don't look at it, pretend that you put it back behind you, just shut it out.
Sarah Foster from Bankrate, which is an excellent resource for people with questions about their money. Thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you tonight.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And the Final Five is back right after this.